Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Timely Topics with the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts. And today I'm very excited to have not one, but two guests on our topics session. This session is being recorded. So if you have to leave early and miss some, do look for the link after our conversation and on social media as well. I wanted to make sure that everyone knows why we are doing some of the work we are doing. We have just come out with a new strategic plan, and our four priority pillars are around economic justice for women, parity in positions of power, freedom from violence and abuse for women and girls, and also nurturing a thriving nonprofit community serving women and girls in our area. And this last element of our work, our new strategic plan, is really pretty much the focus of our conversation today, along with parity in positions of power, because of course, being resilient is really important as you strive to advance for yourself and your families as well. So in case I didn't mention it at the outset, my name is Donna Haghighat, and I am the CEO of the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts. And we're so glad to have you with us either live or if you're watching this as a recording. We promise to keep this quite interesting. My first guest today is Sarah Eisele-Dyrli, and she is with Connecticut Data Collaborative. And I am going to introduce Sarah and let her tell you more about what the collaborative does and what they'll be doing for us, specifically the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts, and mostly the nonprofit audience that has been signing up for this upcoming workshop on using data to tell your stories. But first, before I turn it over to Sarah, I wanted to tell you a bit about her, and I'm sure that she will also tell you a bit more about herself. Sarah Eisele-Dyrli has a master's in social work and is the data engagement specialist at the Connecticut Data Collaborative. Ms. Eisele-Dyrli is a certified trainer who believes that citizens and professionals alike should have access to training so they can evaluate the quality of the information they create or others share with them about public issues, and so they can make high-quality decisions within their institutions. Ms. Eisele-Dyrli holds a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies from Messiah College and a Master of Social Work in Policy and Practice and International Social Work from the UConn School of Social Work. Welcome, Sarah, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself and, of course, even more about Connecticut Data Collaborative.
Sure. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm talking about data. So let's see. I guess I'll just start out talking about myself because I think that my journey is really reflective of a lot of women's journeys, especially as it relates to data. As you hear from my background, I was not a data person. Nothing in my bio says data except curiosity. My curiosity was really I learned how to ask questions through my liberal arts degree, I would say. I was a musician, an aspiring concert pianist all through my life, have been very involved with music all of my life. But I also have, as a curious person, have found questions that there's no answers to that could have insight through data. So that curiosity is really the string through my entire background. I never saw myself as a data person, but as I went through graduate school, I just wanted to be able to answer questions. I wanted to help other people to answer questions that they have related to data. And so that's really where I started trying to figure out how to help people and train people in how to use data. Which obviously brought me to the Connecticut Data Collaborative. At the Connecticut Data Collaborative, our mission is to support informed decision-making through, in part, the use of good quality data. Being able to inform decisions requires knowing what to do with data if you have it, though. And in our journey as an organization, we found it was great for people to have access to data, but a lot of people really just didn't know what to do with it when they had it, or didn't know how to make sure the data they were collecting was of high quality. So our strategies, we have obviously multiple strategies, but one of them is to support data literacy. And we do that through workshops primarily. We do that through our website. We do projects on our website that allow people to explore data and to use data directly from our website in a format that's fairly easy to use. And so data storytelling is, the workshop that we will be providing for the Women's Fund is a really fun workshop where we get to draw and we get to write and we get to explore and ask questions and really learn how to use this form of communication to improve the decisions and support good decision making in whatever institution we may be in.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And I know that you have some information that you're willing to share with us to kind of give a little teaser or a preview. So I would welcome you to do that. And also when you're doing that, either with that data or perhaps talking around that, one of the questions that I wanted to pose to you is, we all know that stories are really powerful and we're not always great about infusing our stories with data. How does data help build an impactful story, or perhaps a more impactful story?
Okay, yeah, I'll show a little quick story I came up with, that just gives an illustration of how this communication tool can be used, and I'll just share how I think that it does help, provide greater impact for in storytelling. So I'm going to share my screen, and there we go. Okay, so I suppose first would be just sharing the fact, just the idea of what is data storytelling. And in the workshop, this is giving away the answer to people in the workshop, but data storytelling, this is the definition I really like, that it's a structured approach to communicating data insights, and involves three key elements: data, visuals, and narrative. And I don't need to explain why stories are so helpful and so impactful. Since the beginning of humanity, cultures have been telling, communicating lessons, communicating history through story. So what makes a difference? So I'll show you a little bit of a data story, and then we can talk a little bit about that. So I looked at the report, the Women's Fund, the status of women and girls in Western Massachusetts in 2019, which is a really interesting report. We're going to be really diving into that in this workshop. But one of the things that was interesting to me was that among youth in Western Massachusetts, female students are at higher risk for depression than male students in every county. And obviously that risk is higher by a significant amount in each county. In Franklin County, 1 in 3 male students are at high risk for depression, while 2 in 3 female students are at high risk for depression. So, in the workshop, what we're going to talk about is that a data story leads to an ask of some kind for your audience to take action. So during the workshop, we'll say, what is the action your audience could take to respond to this data story? And I think that is one of the compelling pieces of data storytelling, is you're not just telling a story just for a lesson or for somebody to feel something. The data also is meant to compel, in a non-forceful way, your audience to take action in some way. And obviously when we're talking about, I can tell you, my own story of my experience in high school with mental health and with depression, but that's just one story. But when I tell you, actually 2 out of 3 females in Franklin County are at risk of having a similar story, like that, the scale of that really hits you, and so I think that the data storytelling helps you provide context, in one way. It helps you to build a case and say, this isn't just a one-off. This isn't just something that you have experienced, but it's something that so many people like you have experienced. Would you join me in helping make sure that other people don't go through what you went through? I think it can be eye-catching and visually, for folks who are more visual in their thinking and their remembering. I will remember this image because of the way I think. And so I think that that's also a way for people to remember, to be able to retell the story. When we talk about this in the workshop, many people will never see the data story that you create. But if you do it effectively, they will accurately tell the data story to other people, because you presented it in a way that was memorable and easy to grasp and understand. Of course, this, again, this is that data storytelling is a form of communication, and it's meant to be communicated. It can be visual. You can listen to a radio and hear a data story, but it really is meant to help you support someone or a group of people to action on something that is of importance.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to open up for our participants that are listening live with us that if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. Sarah, I think one of the things that your presentation that you just did for us really drove home for me was the power of that visual, because when I hear, 1 in 3 or 2 in 3, it's just like sometimes for me numbers in my
Yes.
head. But when you see that visual, it really then reinforces it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's what that looks like. So I think that is really powerful. And I love the thought about, okay, that you're telling the story, but really you're not really wrapping up the story until you figure out what that call to action is. What is it that's compelling?
Yes.
What do you want people to do as a result of hearing this?
Yes.
I think that's really important as well. Now, I know that one of the other questions I was going to cover with you was, why somebody would want to sign up for this workshop in a world of competing workshops, but actually we are in the happy position of having this workshop pretty much fully subscribed. And why, I guess my question would be to you, have you been seeing this all along? And do you think our pandemic has made this even more compelling and important?
I mean, we probably are all in the position of consuming more data, maybe more consciously. Every day, if you turn on the news, if you look on CNN, it has the box right there, in every single, like, you can't look at CNN without seeing data, basically, or some of the other news channels, you can't get away from it. So I think people might be more aware that this is out there. We are seeing more people sign up for our virtual workshops. I wasn't really sure what to expect when we went into this new phase of workshop delivery. But I meant, honestly, also, I think there are probably a lot of people who are attending them kind of more like a webinar, who are in and kind of listening with one ear and, getting what they can while also doing the other things that, everybody is trying to do more with less right now, probably. But I do think people are probably more aware of the importance because it's just more prominent in their lives right now.
And I think that from what I understand, from what you were just sharing, really this session that you're having really there is the word workshop and there is work going to be happening in this.
Right.
So this is probably not the one that you want to, have two other things on different monitors on and just kind of be listening with one ear, because you won't get as much out of it.
You won't.
I'm also struck by what you were just talking about with like news media and having like these banners and like the number of COVID cases or different things. And I know, recently some group has just put in an installment in Washington, D.C. of chairs that are meant to show every 10,000 individuals who have lost their lives to COVID. And I was struck by that as you were talking about the banner, and we start to tune out the numbers in the banner
Yes.
after a while. But when you see the chairs, and of course, part of me is like, well, that's, I get what they're doing and they're trying to fit into a space, but it's actually way more than that, obviously, since each chair represents 10,000 people,
Yes.
which is, yeah. So there's
Yeah.
that as well.
And I mean, imagine that could be a form of data storytelling as well. You know, even there might be an implied action, you know, that people are asking, like, you know, use the preventative behaviors we know work or something like that. So that's an interesting, you know, data story really that you're talking about.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, I guess one final question for you, since our session is pretty much fully subscribed, how would folks find out about other sessions that Connecticut Data Collaborative is putting on that they could sign up for?
Yeah, if you go over to our website at ctdata.org/academy, the list of workshops is up there. We do have a data visualization workshop, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, which is a really fun one. It's 2 parts. Data storytelling relies in part on data visualization, and I give a few little tips and tricks, but in the data visualization workshop series, we actually use Tableau, we use Data Wrapper. They're free tools. I walk you through like how to actually start using those tools to create really compelling visualizations. And then our conference is coming up in November. We already have 60 people signed up, and it just launched last night. So the focus of that conference is ethical practices, equitable solutions, data for everybody, ethical practices, equitable solutions. So that's just another way to connect with other data users and hear ways to really think about equity in data and who is being represented in data and how are they participating in their representation. So we expect that's just another way that you can connect with us too.
Well, that's fantastic, Sarah. We really look forward to hosting your workshop, and we hope those who weren't able to get into the workshop do go to your website, which I believe you said again is ctdatacollaborative.org. Is that correct?
ctdata.org.
ctdata.org, even easier.
Yep, even easier.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining
you.
us, and we look forward to the workshop.
Thank you.
And now I want to turn to another workshop that we are hosting coming up, which is about resilience in these times. And I want to welcome to this conversation Dr. Nayla Bahri. Dr. Nayla Bahri is a coach, researcher, consultant, and educator helping humans do their greatest work in the world. She coaches and consults across industries and teaches at the graduate level at Columbia University. She has conducted original research on how professionals learned and recovered from the 2008 recession. I think they used to call that the he session, and now we're having the she session. And she is using those insights to support all kinds of transitions for her clients in good times and in difficult times. And how appropriate that we have her with us today. In addition to workshops like these, Nayla consults and coaches across industries and levels, including clients at Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital, Apple, American Express, Pantheon Software, Colgate University, Columbia University, HEB, and more. And she co-hosts the podcast, The Inside Job. And we are very happy to welcome you to the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts, Nayla, and we're very excited for your upcoming workshop. And I would love to just turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and all the different things that you do, from teaching to the podcast, which I did listen to a bit of the podcast. You have a co-host. Perhaps you'll tell folks about that as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, thanks for having me so much. I'm happy to be here. I'm a Western Mass, I guess, veteran of sorts. I went to college in the Pioneer Valley, so I have a soft spot for the part of the country that you're in. I'm based in northern New Jersey. So yeah, I have this kind of long list of projects I do, and they're all based around how people experience work. So I'm really interested in how people make sense of work and experiencing it. The number I love to quote is that most adults will spend 90,000 hours of their life at work. And that is more time than we will spend parenting our children, or doing anything really that we're awake for. Ideally, we're sleeping more than that, although, these
Not
days,
us women.
who knows? Yeah. So I don't know that I am, but, so if we're going to spend so much time at work, the question I have is, how do we make that as purposeful, as joyful, as productive, as aligned with who we are as possible? And what I have found over the years is that there's lots of places to have that conversation. So I do some of that in the classroom. I teach at Columbia, largely at the School of Public Health, sometimes still at the business school. I spent most of my career at the business school, do some work with Graduate School of Education there, Teachers College. I do a fair amount of work with private clients, helping them figure out what could be next, whether or not they've been disrupted or they want to kind of cause their own internal disruption. And I do a lot of work with companies, an organization like yours, trying to help them reach managers and employees to help them take ownership of their careers. And I do co-host a podcast with my friend Eric, where we talk about work and life and how those two things intersect.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. And one of the things that we were talking about this morning is we'd just love to know anecdotally, during the pandemic, has the podcast had more people listening to it? Because some of us find ourselves listening to more podcasts.
Yeah, it's funny. We had intended to launch the podcast in the fall. That was our original plan. And then this happened. And Eric and I kind of scrambled and said, I think people want to talk about work more than ever now. And we're all facing all these hours at home, and for better, for worse, kind of having to reconcile with the fact that this is what I do all the time now. So we accelerated it, and we decided, one thing that was shaped by the fact that we were in this situation was that we decided to do a kind of a short form podcast, around 20 minutes or 25 minutes an episode, because people aren't commuting. And so if I think about myself, I used to put podcasts on in the car. And I'm, now my car rides are quite short. So we try to go for 20, 25 minutes. We try to talk about things that affect most of us at work, and how our premise is that we can be more powerful than we believe we can to create the right relationship with work, because it starts on the inside, knowing yourself, understanding yourself, changing yourself when necessary. So that's our premise.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
I think that going to that shorter format is really smart, because we are like, maybe I'll listen to one when I'm cooking dinner or something, but you're right. I did, like you, also used to have some long commutes here and there driving around Western Massachusetts, and I do miss that opportunity to listen to podcasts. So I thought that was a good move.
Thanks.
I think one of the things that you and I had connected on beforehand was one of my pet peeves as a feminist is the eternal question that women get asked, and it's about work-life balance. And, I don't really think there's such a thing, and I think that we probably need to reframe that, but would love to hear a little bit more from you about that.
Yeah, so we actually recorded an episode on this not that long ago. I think it's a kind of a setup, to be honest, and I resent it, if I'm truly candid. What I said in the podcast, and what I say all the time, is whenever I hear the idea of that premise of balance, I picture like through judicial scale with the two baskets. And what is implicit in that message is work's got to fit in one of the baskets, and then everything else must be shoved into the second basket, which means my family life, my health, my wellness, my community, my hobbies, my interests, and which by definition requires them to get smaller and smaller bits of time, because work gets so much. So right away, I think there's a design flaw in the premise. I also think that even approaching the idea of balance requires precision, almost mathematics. And in fact, my life, and I'm sure most people's lives, are far more dynamic than that. And we are constantly recalibrating and rediscovering how to make this work. And so I want to relieve myself and everybody I work with of the burden of thinking it's achievable. I think that there is something we have to think about in terms of integration, in terms of, I referenced years ago when I was making the decision to leave a full-time job to launch my own practice. A friend of mine said, Nayla, there are seasons in our lives, and if this is a season where work's going to look different, then that's going to have to be fine with you. And I have kept that image for so many years now, thinking about seasonality and how we have to flex and adjust and be okay with that. I also think there is, you mentioned how we interpret this as feminists, and there was a post on LinkedIn this morning, and I can't remember who posted it, but it was a woman CEO who just came back from her fourth maternity leave and was saying that as she was sitting around the conference table and they were talking about a candidate up for promotion, they said, well, she has 2 kids already, so how will she balance? And she stopped the conversation and said, we've already talked about 4 male candidates and no one knows how many kids those guys have.
Right.
So I think it's the premise is faulty, and I think it's unfairly sent towards women to figure it out. I don't think it helps us in most regards.
No, and I think that framing also obviously then translates into compensation, right? So that saying it's not just hiring, it's also compensation. Men see a bonus when they do have children. Like,
right.
Obviously they're disclosing it to
yeah.
But women then get penalized. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. I think one of the other things that we wanted to talk about is, this time that we're in with this pandemic, and where many of us, but not all of us, are working from home. But whether you're working from home and have that privilege or not, we're all, our bandwidth has been stretched even further, particularly those women who, have children who are doing either some remote learning or things like that. Without giving away what you're going to be speaking about at the workshop, what strategies are you thinking about highlighting? And perhaps you've done some of this already in your podcast. What will people hope to get from attending the webinar?
Well, the webinar is designed to help people think about using this period of time, which is almost beyond description at this point, as an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to make plans. I think the counsel I offer is, I don't think we can wait till things go back to normal. And I'm using air quotes there because I don't know what normal even looks like, to invest in ourselves. And I think the trade-off that many women, myself included, are forced to make right now because of kids at home and everything else, is that we keep saying, well, it'll come later, I'll have time later. And my argument is, there's no time that's going to be given to you. You're going to have to create time. And if we are going to spend 90,000 hours of our lives at work, the years, the months, the weeks are ticking. And I don't say that to be threatening. I say that to be purposeful and to say, let's make choices about how we spend our time. I think that even if we are home, even if we have been displaced, I'm working with a lot of people who've been furloughed or laid off. Let's use the time to reflect. So when you mentioned that I had done a large study years ago, what we used to call the Great Recession, I guess we still call it that, in 2008, to understand why did some people come out of that experience more resilient than others. And it turns out the good news, as I like to say, is that all of the reasons were behavioral. That we can do things, take action in a structured, disciplined, focused way to increase our ability to bounce back and to carve a new path for ourselves. I find that to be a relief because it doesn't depend on our kind of good nature or natural optimism. We can just kind of counsel ourselves into motion. So one of the things I'll offer in the webinar is insight into a couple of those practices that we can deploy, whether or not we have 2 hours a week or we have 20 hours a week. So we'll explore that more in the webinar. The other thing I'll offer is that I think, and I was talking to a girlfriend this morning about the years in which we were writing our dissertations, which were difficult years, and how much we draw on the insights from that experience of having done something difficult and time consuming, and that can be ego crushing and can often feel like, the easy path would just be to stop. All of us have something in our history. So whether it's a dissertation or it's parenting small children or it's starting a new job or starting a business or, I don't know, changing the kitchen cabinets in your home, whatever it could have been, we all have experiences of doing things that felt really, really difficult. And one of the things I notice in the people who I study who overcome periods of uncertainty is that they draw on those experiences. They stop and they pause and they remind themselves of their capability and they dig deep for that reserve. So that's something I'll just offer, even if you're not able to join us at the webinar, I tell everyone there's been something hard that you've accomplished and something you thought was going to be insurmountable that you were able to get through. So let's figure out what that was and let's figure out what insights and wisdom we can pull from that.
I think that's wonderful because sometimes we tend to probably forget or want to forget something that was painful that we we got through. But the key is to sometimes go back and remember that even though something was yucky, like, I'm thinking about law school and the bar exam, right?
Right.
Uh, like you said, that is also, yes, it was terrible, but you got through it. And so the fact that you got through it tells you that you can get through other periods of adversity, like the one we find ourselves in. And I think that that's such a great point, because we're seeing data already coming out that women are self-selecting out of the workforce because of all the demands that are being put on them, perhaps with remote learning with children. Sometimes they're making a decision because perhaps they are making less than their partner is making.
Yeah,
All of
even
these,
saying selecting
yeah,
really feels like there's a lot of options there. I'm not sure how true that is for some women.
yeah,
Yeah, and I love that you use the word remembering, because I think a lot of what I work with people on is, when we can get through the triage of whatever we have to do to keep our homes running and our families viable during this time. One of the invitations I make to people I'm working with is, if this is a period of reinvention for you, if you have to start over, why don't we look at remembering what you love to do and where you've added value and ways in which you've creatively solved problems in the past, because I believe that gives us great inspiration to move forward. I think the mistake some women make, and some men make too, but is feeling like I've got to take the same shape that I took when I was either removed from my job or I chose to leave my job to sustain my family, and I've got to find exactly the same puzzle piece out there and replicate that experience. And I think this time is an invitation to think, okay, things look different, things are different, so let's be different ourselves. And how can we remember who we really are at our essence, what we really love, and where we add the most value, and create a shape that suits our lives as it is now.
I want to invite anyone who is listening live with us, if you have any questions, to please use our chat function to add your question for Nayla, and we'll get that up. And I think in the meantime, Nayla, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I think what you're talking about really drives home. They say that the word in Chinese for crisis is also the same word, means opportunity. And I think that the way you're framing it with your individual clients, and what it sounds like you will also do with the webinar, is letting folks know that, yes, you're in crisis, and maybe your puzzle piece is not exactly the same because of the crisis, but perhaps then you can find a new puzzle to fit yourself into, and think of this as an opportunity for a new you going forward.
Yeah, that's a lot of how I think and a lot of how I work. And listen, I have to tell you, we all have a negativity bias in our brains. It's a very strong survival instinct, and thank God for it. Like, right? I mean, most of us would have been hit by a moving vehicle if we didn't have it. But I think part of the work that I like to do, and I learned this very honestly from studying people who'd been through professional, and by the way, professional crisis, when I would study these people, they would say to me, it felt like a divorce. It felt like a death in the family. Like, professional, make no mistake, it's not just work, right? A professional crisis is a crisis. Right. But what I learned is that, this is why we're called The Inside Job as a podcast, where people who really have great outcomes learn how to act their way into new modes of thinking and to creating alternatives and options when the world feels like it's shrinking. That idea of like the world feeling very scary and like my options are shrinking feels really familiar to me in this time. That's how I sometimes, I wake up in the morning and it feels oppressive, how difficult things are. And then I have to kind of go into my mind and say, okay, what can I do to create options for myself, for my family, for my clients, for my students? Those are my choices, right? Either succumb or take action to create options. I see this question coming in.
Yeah, so the question looks like, these realities of the challenges faced by women in the workplace, the example of women not being hired because of the number of children they have, seems to result in imposter syndrome in many women. How do we take power related to imposter syndrome and deal with it? Do we need to change our relationship with it, accept it, will be there and manage it, or can we get rid of it?
Yeah, so I will, I'll offer a couple of thoughts on that. And then Donna, if you have things you want to add, I'd be curious to hear them. I think of imposter syndrome as I do fear, which is a form of fear. It's kind of one of the masks of fear, as far as I'm concerned. And I think you're really right, Sarah, when you say, is the question to change the relationship or get rid of it? I'm always a fan of changing the nature of the relationship we have with fear and with imposter syndrome. One, because I think fear, a small dose of imposter syndrome can really make us very clear and can make us refined on what we're looking for, how we're interpreting the environment around us, what's creating that. Is it about the system and how I can influence and shape the system? Is it about my preparedness? I don't want to, so I think there's information to be gleaned by experiencing imposter syndrome. I think the question is, do I let myself be smothered by it, or do I use it as a chance to dig deep and uncover my greatness and my ability and to learn how to talk? And something we'll talk about in the webinar. One of the things I really believe, and I've learned from my research, is that when we learn how to claim our value, as I call it, really, really understand what our contribution is and bring language to it and get very comfortable telling the honest truth about how we change things, we both put imposter syndrome where it belongs, which is kind of like in the back corner, and we allow people to see us and to partner with us in a different way. So I think about fear in the same way. I think it's exhausting to try to kill it. And I'm not in the business of wearing myself down that way. And I also think I want to learn from it. Like sometimes, like fear tells me something matters to me. If I'm a little worried about something, if I feel some imposter syndrome, it starts to tell me, hey, Nayla, you really care about this. Like it matters to you to show up at your best. In which case I say, thank you, imposter syndrome, for giving me that clue. And now I'm going to put you in the back of the room so I can get back to work and do my thing. So that is how I choose to relate to imposter syndrome. I think there's a really wonderful book by Valerie Young, which you may know. I think
I'm laughing. I'm sorry. I'm laughing, Nayla, because Dr. Valerie Young is a great friend to the Women's
yes.
Fund, and we actually hosted her last year. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because I was going to bring it up as well.
I love that book, and I think she's really wise. And I think, when I read that book, I looked at it and I thought one of the things that I found very compelling about her work is that it shows us that the imposter kind of wears different masks. Again, the way I feel about fear, the way I feel about imposter syndrome, the way I feel about worry is I'm not in the business of crushing it. I'm in the business of getting curious about it and looking at it and understanding what it tells me. And then I make a choice to put it in the back seat or the back of the room, just put it where it belongs.
And I love the way that you framed that and I also love that Sarah was the person who asked this question, because when you frame it as like gathering information about like, is this imposter syndrome, like what's going on with me? Is it a little fear that's going to actually help kind of make me better? Or is it like toxic and like, this is not like what I've signed up for? Right. I think that's awesome when we think about the sort of our emotional curiosity of what is this that I'm feeling, and is, and to your point about Dr. Valerie Young, reading her book will help people understand what the syndrome is and how to recognize it when they're experiencing it. And I love your, that you mentioned that the podcast is called The Inside Job. And I think when we think about that, and we think about that Dr. Young talks about people wearing masks, well, I think when you're talking about the inside job a little bit, you're talking about how we can work on ourselves on the inside. And probably what we could also do is think about what kind of a mask or appearance, how we want to come into the world based on that, I guess, right?
Yeah. I think that's my thinking has always been like, it's like a relationship. It's like work, right? I always say we are in a relationship with our work, right? So in the same way that we learn to take responsibility for the personal relationships in our lives, I think we learn to take responsibility for the relationship we have with work, and to know, and if we can clean up some of the inside, right? This idea that does fear hold us, or do we relate to fear? Then we can make different choices at work. We can ask for different things from our managers and our organizations. We can make moves when we feel, even though we feel some fear. That's the premise. The idea is, I'm not saying, I don't believe people who say they never feel fear. I believe people who say they've learned how to manage their fear. And those are the people I want to be like, and I want to help create a community of women who feel that way, that we are aware of it, it's informative to us, and we make choices anyway.
Mm. I was lucky to go to a workshop that Carly Fiorina had done in the Springfield area last year, and she talked about one of her pivotal moments was around fear, and she also, like you said, it wasn't that I didn't feel fear. It was really about thinking about my absence, or if I became paralyzed by that fear, what would the downside be? And she realized that she really needed to act in order, because the staying, paralyzed or freezing was worse than moving forward and acting. So I do like that, because as women, we sometimes tend to sort of tamp down our emotions and say, we want to say, if I'm feeling something, maybe I shouldn't feel that, I shouldn't be afraid, and we try to tamp it down, but actually it's giving us a message.
I love that. I love that. And I think, this is one of the things I really love to explore with women I work with, is what I call career desire, which is a word we don't usually use desire around work, but we want things. And sometimes the things that show up as fear or jealousy or feelings that we normally label as like ugly or not flattering, they're really, really, really useful pieces of information about what we crave, what we desire. And I think if I can feel a little bit of imposter syndrome or fear and let it kind of be a flashlight for me about what I want, then I can make some decisions about pursuing that, with preparation, intelligently, with the support of other people around me. But I think if we just reject the fear, just reject the imposter syndrome, then we lose the chance to explore it. And I think there's usually really good data in there.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love not only feeling it, but being okay with it, because as women, we're also taught not to be ambitious, right? Ambitious is like, a man, it's okay, but
nothing is scarier than a woman's appetite, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Of every kind.
Well,
so
I know that I am really looking forward to your workshop, and I imagine the folks who have been on this call and the many who will see it in its recorded form will really want to tune in as well. So I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Sarah, also thanking you for your time, and we are looking forward to both of these workshops. And I wish you both continued resiliency, right? We've all learned quite a bit, and thank you both for your time, and we look forward to having you both share more with our audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.